Hello and welcome to what is very likely to be one of my longest videos on this channel, given that the thing I'm about to react to is over 5 minutes long, almost 6 minutes, and I am probably going to talk a lot. So just like the last reaction I did, I'm also going to do a breakdown section after I do the reaction, so if you want to just skip ahead to that, go for it. If you've already seen it or you don't care about my reactions, but I'm going to do the reaction part anyway, just to see if there's anything interesting that catches my eye initially. So without further ado, let's get into the Near Light event teaser, shall we? Let's go!
この手に汗握る試合をもって今季のメジャー選手権予選大会の大団円となります。ここで注目すべきなのは
Nothing like watching the news. Ooh. Beautiful reflections there again. Great cloth sim. Ooh, the volumetrics. There's a lot of fog in this city. It's great for lighting though, very cinematic. That first shot there of that guy turning around gave me major, like, Arcane vibes. I know it's probably a cop-out to say, but it's what happened. Oh no. Oh. I love this blend of having the 2D switch between with the 3D. It's like part of flashbacks. That's really neat. Oh, the chromatic aberration there. Their simulation work is insane. Who hurt that little girl? I'm gonna find her myself. Beat the ass. Really cool use of that rotation in the camera there. All right. I
感染者にとって騎士って一体何なの？
Ooh, okay, hold up. I know I haven't said much, like
騎士とは大地を照らす崇高なる存在だ。
Ooh, okay. Oh, okay. It's starting to get spicy now. All right, cool. Jesus Christ. Okay. Wow. All right. Yeah. Definitely some talking points here. For a second there, I was starting to get a little bored, and now I'm mad that I was getting a little bored. There are things to talk about. So, with that said, shall we? So, if we'll look into this right here, I wanted to walk through this part. I'm not going to do every single shot of these little flashback sequences, but I wanted to talk about a few things in here. For one, the aberration being used, and the other, how it animated certain things in certain ways to do certain things in motion. Like this, with the aberration, I wanted to showcase how interesting this is. The aberration seems to function as a defocus, similar to how they did in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and that what will be trilogy of films. Very more of a modern concept to use that in that way. It adds this sort of like it tricks your eye into feeling like there's a blur where there's not, but it also adds some visual interest, especially in stuff like this that has a lot of that color popping, and it makes things really stand out to the subconscious, less than the immediate conscious if you're not paying attention to it or looking for it. So you can see it as I kind of bump through the frames in here, how some of the frames don't really have much of it. And I believe that that is due to trying to focus on the character before they change emotion like she is about to do, or just straight up they decided she was maybe going a little too fast to have all of that aberration going. Either way, I'm not fully positive, because like right here, you can see that it's on her back leg, but not on her head, or in like it's down on her foot, but not on her knee, stuff like that. There are separations there in what is being used. I also wanted to mention that while this whole thing, I'm going through one frame at a time, and you're seeing her animated on ones, one frame at a time, while when they decide to switch to her jumping forward, these are on 2 frames with the background changing. You can see like right there, the effect is still going, but the character isn't moving. That is a very, very, very common trick to do in order to show power or movement speed. And sometimes if there is a motion happening, like in this case, they will do it on 2s in order to show the speed, but keep it to the pace of the 1 frame a second that came prior. I've done this a few times before myself. So you see right here, this frame is why I think, because look at all of that aberration. I mean, I don't need to circle it. You don't need the red circle. But look at all of that aberration there. That is so much aberration, which is why I think it's being used as a blur rather than anything else, and why her, like again in this frame, her head has focus, but the body is still a lot more aberrated. And even right here is great perspective, by the way, just a side note there, but beautiful perspective. But still has it. And strangely enough, it's actually focusing on her knee area and not like her foot, because that's aberrated. Like the focus of the camera is being pulled right around here, which is just interesting. But yeah, there's really not much else to talk about in this scene because of this. It's just good animation. The character animation, the weight of it, the feeling, the speed is all just top tier, but you can't expect anything less out of a professional team. So that is solid as I'll get out. Before hopping into this next part, I wanted to mention that while I did mention multiple times during the reaction, the simulation work is fantastic, and that is true. The simulations are great. The fire, all the crumbling and rocks and everything, that's all really good, but it's not really much that I can personally talk about. I'm not a simulator, I'm an animator. I just wanted to preface that. This, I wanted to talk specifically about this expression. There's not too much I'm going to talk about on it. I just wanted to double down on how well this was handled visually. There's this shadow casted on her face. Usually Japan does this in anime a lot, to have a shadow cast onto the face when somebody is depressed or just out of whack and they're not focused on something. It's a way to sell the emotion of loss or confusion, and it's very common. I could go and talk about the ears being drooped because, like, of course, she's based on an animal. That would make sense. The ears would be drooping to show sadness, and the eyes are a little bit droopy as well to show similar sadness, but the eyes are not focused anywhere. And that is very hard to sell in a character a lot of the time. Usually, when you have a rig or you're drawing, you would have the character kind of look like they're focused all the time because it's very rare to not do that. So, having a defocused expression is very hard to do. For one, just to explain how cool this is, she is not looking anywhere. Her gaze is nowhere. There's nothing over here. And we know that there's nothing over there because we've seen the environment. We know that there's nothing there. So it's also really cool here that her eyes are dilated inward, which is usually a sign of anxiety, among other things. So it's really well used in this case to make her seem like she's just not grabbing attention of something, which is also interesting because the mind can also perceive shrunken pupils as a sign of too much focus, and that could be going on in both cases in a sign of stress and high anxiety. So her mind could be rattling around options or just completely lost, and it's hard to tell. And that ambiguity is why this sells so well. I know earlier that when I drew these pupils' lines outward, I kind of drew them towards the same direction, but that's actually not what they're doing, and I want to clarify. Her eyes aren't really looking in the same direction, and that also sells how this looks. So her eyes, while being right here and right here, aren't exactly focused on the same point. They're not twinning, which is a thing that people usually use in rigged animations to talk about how eyes being in the perfect exact position, just in the opposite socket. So this isn't happening here. This one and this one are in slightly different positions, and not only because her head is turned, but because they're not focusing on anything. And that is another subtle trick that you can do to make the character look like they're not focusing on something. A more exaggerated version of this would have her eyes in completely different directions to make her look like she just got bonked on the head or something that they use in comedy. Whereas if you're using it in a more traumatic sense of this, it just shows how much trauma and how much energy is going through the mind while also not being able to process any further visual distinction. So she is looking like out here with this one, and then this one looks to be more like down there. So there's a wide scope of vision, and there's nothing in that scope, which is why this expression works so well. Now for a point that I actually want to criticize here. This expression, this pose. Not specifically the pose of the body, but the pose of the face. So there's a lot happening in this sequence. She just got blown away by a huge explosion, and usually you would perceive that to be like a stressful thing. So of course you would have teeth clenched, eyes clenched, but she was just blown away. You know, maybe not knocked out, but it would be enough that your body wouldn't be able to realistically, at least, have this sort of clench happen after that were to happen. That's too much energy on the outside to share on the inside. So odds are her mouth here would be open, her eyebrows would be more up here, that sort of thing. It wouldn't necessarily be this down clenched, teeth clenched. It's just a little bit weird of a choice. It's an odd choice that I personally would have said go for a more lighter expression, because there was a lot of energy spent to put the character in that scenario that wouldn't result in them still clenching like they're still trying to fight off an explosion. She lost. So character reaction wise, it would make more sense to have her be a little bit more loose in the expression because she just got the wind knocked out of her. This shot is not one that I actually planned to talk about, but I was clicking through and I saw it and I'm like, that's actually a pretty good example of this. So I wanted to show you this power struggle here and how the visuals force that mindset into the viewer. So while you're going through this frame by frame, you see the character standing here, she drops to her knee, looks defeated. But there's so much visual language to reinforce this, and the why, that's just really interesting. All of these up here are towering over her. They have a power over this scope of area. You can see that they're above her, and being taller or larger than another character is a very standard way to show a power difference. So you think David and Goliath, you know, that sort of thing. You have the giant and the regular sized person. Whereas in this context, you have this swarm above this character who's standing there trying to look strong. But then she falls to her knees, showing that defeat. And as she goes down, all these don't move down. They stay there and they fan out, which is super cool because it just shows that power scaling even more aggressively. This character lost, and in that one shot of this character falling to her knees, you can tell who's in control here. And visually, that's a very good idea. Directorially, that was a great choice. Now, this shot right here, of course I was going to talk about this one. This one's sick. So, being able to slice through all that, get the air circulating, and again, we have the example of all of these air plumes around the sword, just making a cyclone of movement around the character. That's just super cool. Having that extra visual detail of having the character's blade make something happen in the scene is super helpful to sell a shot like that, especially when there really wouldn't usually be anything else. Having those little extra effects animations can really sell certain things that would have felt way less powerful had they not been included. This shot here is a great way to change the 180-degree rule, which I will explain a little bit more if you don't know what that is. They follow this arrow up into the air, and they use that as an excuse to flip the camera around. Now, the 180-degree rule is a rule of filmmaking where, from a top-down perspective, I'm just going to sketch this on screen. Imagine this is the camera, this is the area behind the camera is shooting from there, right? And everything out from here is what the camera is catching. Now, the point of the 180-degree rule is that you are not supposed to go beyond the points of 180 degrees around the camera. The camera itself can go this way, it can go that way, it can go up, down, whatever. As long as it's within this 180 degrees, it's not going past that line. It has to stay within its own half of that circle. Breaking the 180-degree rule usually means confusion visually. You don't have focus on the same characters, or it feels jarring because something is changed drastically in the scene that the mind is not expecting it to. So usually in film, you'll have a camera focusing a character from one direction, and then in order to show a different character talking, they would maybe switch that around, and usually even then, they just kind of stick to the same 180 and have them talk on one, like, left and right of the camera, where doing stuff like this, they want to change the entire layout of the shot. So they're able to take this, use it to flip that around, and manage to go back in the other direction to focus on a different part of the entire area. I love it when cameras get creative like that and they have that environment to work with, and the directors and cinematographers working on a project know that they have those to work with. Sometimes people just play it safe, but it's nice to see it when they don't. So of course I wanted to talk about this as well, because this sequence uses what is known as an impact frame. For a lot of people who watch action anime, you probably have seen this a dozen, hundreds of times, and you don't even notice, but I'll go through frame by frame to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So of course you have the buildup of the energy. The framing here is really good, having the character aiming at a spot of the screen that's wide open. You can just kind of have her stand there and know that the arrow is going to go over here somewhere. But here's an impact frame, right? That's super neat. It's basically just a frame that is completely, probably more than likely in this case, painted over from the original source and changed the lighting and the impacts here, these stars having all of this going on, all that detail in the effects animation side to make that impact, that power, sell a little bit more. But right next to it, completely blue. These aren't used every single time. Usually you find them as flashes of white, but in this case it makes sense as blue due to the lightning you see a frame before, and it's just a really good way to sell that extra power. It is so bright in that one moment that it fills the entire space. It is a blinding light. And that is a great way to show that. And then, of course, right back to the main animation as she fires the shot. And all of this sprawling energy in individual little spikes and electric trailing reaching out and what I can only assume to be some sort of like a dark energy in these like black strings is super fucking cool to look at. And right up after that, we have another great example of using the free camera in a 3D space to change the perspective and focus of the shot. So right here at the end of that last sequence, you can see the character that we're about to focus on is right here, clearly. And the camera is behind them. The camera here is still within that 180 degrees we talked about earlier. It's behind her and on the kind of on the side, but still within that half circle space. But the camera is now moving around to meet her in the front. So it's super neat to have that because, again, it's another great use of the camera and the room they have and the ability of 3D to just kind of free transform that camera wherever they need. Now, this shot here is really cool just for the point of the lighting on it. The camera's moving in pretty darn quick. Obviously, we're following from the point of view of the arrow, more or less. And this character isn't really moving. She almost looks like a 2.5D character. Like there's a little bit of motion, like a still picture, but the hair is kind of flowing. There's not a lot going on there, but that's because it's happening so fast and it makes her look like a statue. And here we have another great example of that same lighting. I'm wondering if they didn't use a different style of lighting to showcase things like the tail here. Like this isn't the lighting we've been getting on most things throughout this project, as well as like the hair up here. Basically anything with volume is getting treated differently, so I believe that they probably used a slightly different method to light those parts of the body, if not going afterwards in order to light them. It almost reminds me of the movie Klaus, which is a great film if you haven't seen it. It blends some 2D and 3D elements in order to make a 3D animation appear more 2D, and it is very cleverly done there. And I believe that this is doing something very similar in the hair. Of course, right after that, we have this shot here, which has more impact frames, which again, I believe were just taken out of context and then repainted in another program and then brought back in a full white frame because, of course, lightning, white, it would blow out the screen. And then this really cool, like, almost dark smoky effect there on this frame. This just really sells that energy payoff because you see all of this expel from what we can assume to be the power going into this point up here and just going out in every direction, just it's just anywhere that's not that point. It's a super minor and literally like one frame just to make the brain go, wow, that was a lot. Yet again, another impact frame right here, another couple. The full black is a great way, just inverting what would be this one is a super easy and good way to show a super bright object making a heavy impact. It's probably the most common use of an impact frame. So with all that said, I think I've said about all I can do. This video is already running over 40 minutes raw, so I'm gonna have to edit down a lot. But if you want to support me and even my own animation stuff, go and support me on Patreon. I would be very grateful if you did. And if you want to support something I'm working on of my own accord, it is a pilot called Project Cliffside, which is just a working title that I've been developing slowly over the past couple years. I still have a lot I want to do with it and a lot more I need to change in order to get it to be more feasible. But if you want to support the production of that and maybe eventual pilot release, please support me there. Go follow me on that Twitter. With all that said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed what I had to say, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye!